for joining us. Welcome to this session about carbon pricing. We have hopefully three presenters in this session. And the first paper presented is called the Special Effects of Carbon Pricing on Agriculture and Bioenergy in the United States. And I leave the floor to Jerome Dumortier, who will present it for 20 to 30 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Jerome Dumortier, and I will be presenting the paper. So let me share my screen with you. Give me 1 second. So you can all see. My screen right now. Okay, perfect. So welcome. So this is the work that I will be presenting is called Spatial Effects of Carbon Pricing on Agriculture and Bioenergy in the United States. And this is work together with Dr. Amani Elobeid from Iowa State University. I'm affiliated with Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, IUPUI, a very long name. So I abbreviated it here as IUPUI. Note that first of all, the presentation is online. So I have some links in the presentation. So if you're interested in the links, you can just click, you can download the presentation and then click the links. So the topic of my presentation is about the possibility of a carbon tax in the United States. So it has been, in the previous years, it has been very unlikely, but it's gaining traction given the new administration. And in 2019, there was the proposal that was called Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act of 2019, or EICD. And basically what that act would do in the US is impose a carbon fee on covered entities emitting use or sale or transfer and emitting use of any covered fuel. It's basically, it would, here they are using the term carbon fee. I will be using the term carbon tax because that's what it is. And it would basically impose a carbon tax on fuel producers and fuel sales. Now, what we are going to do in this work or in this project is we are evaluating the effects of such a carbon tax on US agriculture. There's a lot of discussion around what it does to farmers and also what it does to global agricultural trade in the case there is a carbon tax imposed, because farmers, depending on the crop, they are using a lot of fertilizer. For example, if you're thinking about maize in the United States. And so if the fertilizer is taxed, if there's a fertilizer tax, or if they have to pay fuel, then or also other raw materials, then what is the effect of that tax on agricultural production? We are interested, when I say agricultural production, we are interested in the cost of production. We are interested in what happens to commodity prices, to land allocation, and also to farm income and trade. Now note that this is a two-part analysis. So the first part we have already published. It's a paper which is called "The Effects of a Carbon Tax in the United States on Agricultural Markets and Carbon Emissions from Land Use Change," and this has been published just a couple of weeks ago in Land Use Policy. Note that if you download, you can just click on the link. And then what I will be presenting in this analysis or in this presentation is the second analysis, where we are really looking at the regional and the spatial effects of a carbon tax in the United States. The link between the two is that we are taking data, or we are taking projections from the Energy Information Administration that has evaluated scenarios in terms of carbon tax. And we are taking those projections, and I will describe them in detail later. We take those projections and we are translating those projections into a change in the cost of producers, cost for producers. And we are plugging in those costs, and then we are conducting our analysis. But more on that later. So, by the way, since we are a small group, if there are any questions, just feel free to interrupt me. Okay. So, when you're looking at the act that was proposed in the US, you have basically a starting price of carbon of $15 per metric ton. That is in terms of a CO2 equivalent, and the carbon tax would increase by $10 per year. Adjusted for inflation in each subsequent year. And the carbon tax would stop once an emission target is fulfilled, which is a 10% reduction, or then 10% reduction from the emissions in 2016. Now note what the Act does, or what the EICD Act does. It has exemptions for agriculture. First of all, if fuel is used for farming purposes, so think about the diesel fuel used for a tractor, that is exempt from the tax, and also non-fossil fuel emissions from agriculture are exempt as well. So think about emissions from enteric fermentation, from manure management, from fertilizer application. So those direct emissions are not covered under the tax. Okay. Now, of course, most of this is because of political reasons. Now, what the Act? There are two characteristics of the Act that are important and that are supposed to make the Act a little bit, from a political standpoint, a little bit more palatable. There's a carbon dividend. What this means is that the Act is carbon neutral, is revenue neutral, in the sense that if all the revenues that are collected by the government from the tax are redistributed back to households in terms of a lump sum payment. Okay, so that there's no additional revenue generated by the federal government. Second, there's also a border adjustment fee, or border fee adjustment, that basically tries to avoid that if any, say, fertilizer in the US, if fertilizer is suddenly taxed, there's a higher price, that farmers cannot switch to imported fertilizer from a different country where it is not taxed. This border adjustment would make it such that the fertilizer which is imported has the same price than the fertilizer in the United States. Now note that since the effects of a carbon tax are difficult to estimate, since there's very little historical data. And so when I say there's little historical data, we are aware that there are a lot of carbon pricing schemes around the world. The World Bank has a very very comprehensive report. I think it's called Carbon Pricing, State of Carbon Pricing in 2020, which describes the various initiatives in countries. But here in the US, there's no data on carbon pricing and what the effects are. So because there is this little historical data, what we are going to do in this paper or in this project is that we are using simulation models. Okay, so the global analysis, we have used what is called the CARD model for that, or the Center for Agricultural and Rural Development. And it is basically an agricultural outlook model which projects agricultural production on a global scale over the next 10 to 15 years. And what we are doing in this model is we are just looking at the US component, and we have data on the various counties. So think about counties are the second administrative units below a state level. And we are using a simulation approach here, where we say, okay, we can model agricultural production with a simulation model, and then we are changing the cost to farmers, and then based on the difference between the baseline, say for example the baseline land allocation and the land allocation that we have from a carbon tax, we can determine what is that change in land allocation is then due to the carbon tax. Okay. Now it's very difficult to find. It is very difficult to find projection about a carbon tax in the United States of what exactly would be the macroeconomic consequences of a carbon tax. So what we do is we are using data from the US Energy Information Administration, and what they do is every year they are producing what is called an annual energy outlook. Okay. Now, what the annual energy outlook does is it has long-term projections of consumption and production of energy indicators in the United States. So how much gasoline is produced, how much diesel is consumed, what is the price of natural gas, what is the price of electricity, what is the electricity mix in terms of resources, is it coal, is it natural gas, is it renewables, etc. And they produce a reference case, or the AEO is producing a reference case every year, in the sense that this is a baseline of how they think energy consumption and production will evolve in the United States. What they do is they're producing what are called side cases. What those side cases do is they are imposing certain policies, and they are comparing the outcome from the policy. You can then compare that to the baseline. Now in 2020, what they did is they ran 3 additional, they were running a lot of additional scenarios, but the 3 that are of interest to us are called a carbon fee scenarios, or the carbon tax scenarios. And those carbon tax scenarios, what they do is they start at $15, $25, and $35 in the initial year, and they're increasing at 5% over year. Okay, so note that this is a little bit different from what we have seen in the the EICD Act, where we have a linear increase. Here from the AEO, they have actually an exponential increase. But using the data from the AEO has the advantage that what comes along with this data is very detailed macroeconomic data. So what happens to prices, what happens to input prices, what happens to the price of electricity, of gasoline, etc. So that's what we are going to use as the starting point for our analysis. Are those price projections from the AEO? Okay. Note that the AEO, we have the carbon price at the end of the projection period ranges between $62 and $144 per metric ton. Okay. So in this analysis, we are using the energy prices, and we are also using the wholesale price index. Think about the wholesale price index. It's sometimes also called the producer price index. For all commodities, fuel and power, metal and metal products. Okay. Now those price series and also the wholesale price index, or the producer price index, is what we need to determine the cost of production, because the CARD model has a cost of production model that we can use. So we plug in the price data for the various commodities under the baseline and also the carbon tax scenarios, and then we can determine of how exactly do input prices for farmers evolve in the long run. Now we also have the county level model, what I'm presenting here, and this is based on the same data. And I am using the crops that I'm covering here is maize or corn, soybeans, sorghum, and wheat. Note that at the end of the presentation, I'm also going to show you some results from the previous analysis, which covers, or from the global analysis, which covers more crops. Okay. So let me just show you a little bit of the results here in a graphical or using graphs, so to say. So I start off with the evolution or the change in the change from the baseline between the various scenarios from the annual energy output. So if you're thinking about, say, let's take the price of diesel here, okay? Then we have the scenario, the GHG 15, 25, and 35. And then what you see here is the difference between the reference case and the say the GHG 25 case, okay, which means that in the GHG 25 case, where the carbon tax starts at $25, that the diesel price at the end of the projection period is about 25% higher than without the carbon tax. Okay. Now, what has farmers worried about the carbon tax is what you see here on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, when you're thinking about what this does from the price of natural gas. Okay. Now, it turns out that here the price of natural gas would rise substantially in the case of a carbon tax. And also note that fertilizer, the production of fertilizer, is heavily reliant on natural gas. So we would see a significant increase in the price of fertilizer because the price of natural gas would increase. Now, let us just have a look at what it does in terms of the cost of production. So you see that here I'm using the 4 crops, maize, sorghum, soybeans, and wheat. And note that we have in the United States, or the contiguous United States, is subdivided into 8 regions, what are called farm resource regions. And basically, how you can think about this is those regions are very homogeneous in terms of agriculture. Okay, so if you're thinking about, for example, the heartland, okay, that is the U.S. Midwest, where you have states like Indiana, Iowa, Illinois, that are forming the corn belt. So you have a region that is mostly dominated by a maize soybean rotation, and you can see that the cost of production. So, for example, for corn, let's take the GHG 35 scenario. Okay, that the cost of production for corn would increase by over 30%. Okay, and note that for now this is just the cost of production based on the carbon tax that starts at $35 and increasing at 5%. Okay. Note that there are differences in terms of increase. So if you're comparing the corn, if you're comparing that with soybeans, that you have a lower increase for soybeans because soybeans are using less fertilizer or less nitrogen fertilizer than corn. Hence, you are having the slightly lower increase. The same is true for wheat. And you can see that there are some regional differences. Okay, but in general, carbon intensive or energy intensive crop production would, of course, see a lot of increase in the production and the cost of production. Now, if you're thinking, so the model we are using is a simulation model. Okay, so cost of production for farmers is one side, but what we also have is that a change in the land allocation. So if you're thinking about straight economic theory, you have an increase in the cost of production or you have an increase in input prices. That means you're going to reduce your output. So what happens, what we see in the model is that we have a reduction in the production. A reduction in the area allocated to the crops. You see actually small decreases in corn or maize, you see small decreases in Illinois and Iowa. Those are states that are heavily reliant on corn production. And so this would range between 1.4 and 1.7%. And that you have for corn, for soybeans, you have smaller decreases of 4.1%. Note that in the United States, you also have what is called the Conservation Reserve Program, which is an agricultural set-aside program. And there are some interactions. So some farmers will find it more profitable to remove their land from crop production and set it aside into the Conservation Reserve Program. Okay. Now, if there is a reduction in area of, say, corn, sorghum, and wheat, that also means that prices are going to react. So when farmers say about the increase in cost of production, okay, then they also have to realize that it will also increase the cost of, it will also increase their output price, okay, from their commodities. So it is not a one-to-one reduction in terms of revenue, because you have the cost increase, but at the same time you also have the commodity prices increase. And we can see that because we can see that here we have for maize, we have actually an increase in the cost of production, an increase in the crop price by up to almost up to 15%. So when you look at how this looks like in terms of farm income, okay, then you see that, well, the redder it is, okay, or the darker it is, the bigger the decrease in farm income or profits, if you will. So what we expect is, so in the areas here where you have a small of, like, say, between about a 10% decrease in farm profitability from that carbon tax. Note that here what I'm presenting is the highest carbon tax of that starts at $35. Then you see that states, so the little dots are the counties, okay? So that states that are heavily involved in corn production, or that have a very high yield or very productive in corn production, that their prices or their farm income is actually not as affected as farm areas in the fringe area, so to say, okay? In the sense that you have the northeast, you have the Atlantic, okay, and then you also have you have here Montana. So here they are much more affected by the carbon tax than the heartland in the United States, where you have the majority of agricultural production. So here, this is just the graph that we have from the global analysis. Okay, I thought I'm going to present this as well, where we have here on the vertical axis, on the horizontal axis, we have the carbon price in dollars per metric ton. On the horizontal axis, we have the change in net revenue or in profitability. So, and you can see that oats are very affected by a carbon tax. Okay, but you see that in general, and this is for the US and globally, that the change in profitability is between 0 and say 13%. We have this outlier here of minus 15% for oats in the very high carbon scenario. So now in terms of conclusion, okay, so the cost of production increase from carbon tax are just one aspect of the equation. You also have a change in the land allocation, and hence you also have a change in prices. And there are certainly differences in terms of who is going to have the bigger or who is going to have a small impact and who is going to have a large impact, based on the productivity and based on the location within the US. We did find, and we are still working on this, there are interactions with the set-aside program. So how many farmers would actually choose to put the land into the set-aside. Note that this, of course, depends on the rental rate that the government is paying. We have data on that. And there's also a cap. So I think the cap is currently about 25 or 30 million acres. So there's a limit of how much land can actually be put into the conservation reserve program. And so that is it for my my presentation. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Jerome, for this very clear and convincing presentation. I'm opening the floor for questions. So go ahead. You can, I think, turn on your microphone, since directly we are not too many here.
So, hello. Thanks for the presentation, Jerome. I have a question regarding you said that there will be some decreases in production in some areas. Mm-hmm. Does this mean that these areas are replaced by other cultures, or what does?
Yes. So I haven't looked into the exact allocation yet. So how the model works is that there's also, first of all, there's a substitutability. So we think we have the first effect in terms of, so if in the Midwest, corn, maize, and soybeans are usually planted in rotation. So you have maize, then soybeans, maize, soybeans, or you have maize, soybeans from one year to the next. And what we think is going to happen since corn is maize is very affected by the tax, that farmers are going to plant more. Soybeans. That is one effect. But at the same time, what we think is going to happen is that, and we have seen this, that they are also going to reduce the total area of land that is in agriculture, because it may be that even when they're switching from maize to soybeans, that it is still not profitable. And this is when we are seeing this set-aside program, or the conservation reserve program. So that is a possibility as well. So that they're decreasing overall area in addition to switching to soybeans, for example.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Another question, Owen?
Great presentation, Jerome. At the start, you said that diesel use on land would be exempt. I think that's the same as in Europe, where the diesel used by farmers is exempt from VAT. So did you include that or not?
We did not. So I think we could have, so because we have the cost of production model, the cost of production module, it does include, say, fertilizer, fuel, electricity, seed, you name it. We chose not to, because I think it's more the, I mean, theoretically, if you think about it, right, from an optimal point, they should not be excluded, right? So it's purely political that it's purely political in the US, purely for political reasons that they are excluded. And we thought that, okay, let's just have like a clean analysis and just include them, and not get into the details of what is excluded, what is not. Okay. Advantage is that it would also, what we have is kind of, it indicates the upper bound of effects.
Okay, so I can understand the realpolitik is that will never be taxed, so you're right to leave it out. But does it make up much of the use? Then my second question is natural gas. Is that used much in agriculture as well?
So natural gas is used for fertilizer production. So that's the big, so that's, I think in the US, it's natural gas is heavily used in fertilizer production. So that is what what makes the cost for fertilizer increase, because it's really the energy mix is, I think, to my understanding, just natural gas.
And you treat that as agriculture rather than industry, the production of fertilizer.
So how we do this in how the cost of production model works is you have a price index for fertilizer, and that price index is modeled by well, I have to look it up, but that price index for fertilizer is modeled as a function of the price of natural gas, or like a combination of price of natural gas and price of electricity. And so from the AEO, we are getting those two price series that are then linked to the price of fertilizer, the price index of fertilizer. And that's where we get the increase in terms of fertilizer costs.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Another question? While you are thinking, I've got one. You say that the bill does not include N2O emissions from agricultural soils, but I guess that these emissions may differ from one crop to the other, and for instance, between cereals and legumes like soybean. So since the tax would have a differential impact on soybean and cereals, do you think the impact on N2O emission from soils could be important?
That's actually a very good question. And I don't know what the trade-off here is. So so maize is definitely used. So if you're thinking about the the fertilizer use, which also then plays into N2O emissions ultimately, or part of, is definitely higher in for maize. So what it would do to what the trade-off there is between the, so if you're taking away the fertilizer, what the trade-off here is between soybeans and maize, I would not know. I don't know, but it's a very interesting question.
Thanks. Are there other questions in the audience?
Yeah, I have another question. I didn't get why there were such big difference in farm income in between regions. Like, for example, why Montana was so affected and the Midwest.
So it's basically related to the profitability. So if you're thinking about the yields or the crop yields in the United States, or say if you're thinking about corn, let's stay with corn and soybeans, which are grown in the Midwest. Give me 1 second here. Okay. So you have corn or maize and soybeans that are grown here. They are, first of all, they have a very high yield, and they're also very, very profitable. Okay, because of so you need very little inputs to get a lot of output. Okay, and so since you have the cost increase, the cost of production increase, plus but you have a lower decrease in area because it's so profitable. So you have a small decrease in area, you have a cost increase, but you also have the price increase, a lot of price increase for those crops. So which makes the overall effect very, very smaller. Now, if you're looking at wheat, so note wheat in the United States are growing in two areas. They're growing here and they're growing here. Okay. Now, you also see that so wheat is already not very profitable. So that's the reason why you have this large decrease here. So you're already starting from low profitability, which is also due to lower yields, and then you're putting the cost on you're increasing the production cost that has a much bigger effect on the price, on overall farm income, if that makes sense.
Thanks. Another question in the audience?
This is Junko Ogawa from the Institute of Energy Economics Japan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, I try to use my camera, but it doesn't work. So sorry that I cannot use. Okay, I found the button. Oh, it doesn't work. I don't know.
Oh,
Here
yes,
you are. Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very interesting for me because in Japan, here in Japan, we have also very hot discussion whether we have to introduce carbon tax or carbon pricing or not. And my question is a very general question that I'm very interested in the public acceptance towards the carbon pricing in the United States, and what is the possibility to be introduced in the United States. You know that Japan usually look for the policy measures in the United States. So I would like to hear general, how can I say, information about the carbon pricing discussion in the US. Thank you very much.
Yes. Okay. So this is a very interesting question. Personally, I think that there's low probability that this is going to be introduced. Let's just be real here. I think the acceptance or the public acceptance of a carbon tax is as divided as the political landscape here, to be quite frank with you. I think there are a lot of people who really want to have a carbon tax imposed. Now, the interesting part is that I think here in the United States, you have to differentiate. I think what is important is to differentiate between the federal government and the state governments. So state governments, they have a lot of power, and there are states that are pushing for more environmental regulation, zero emission vehicles, etc. And it's not only California. At the federal level, I just think the chances are slim. And you know, I have been presenting this long time ago. I mean, not long time. I mean, like 2 years ago. 2 years ago at a group of farmers, and I mean, they were talking about. So before I presented, they were talking about how the weather has changed. They have never seen weather like this before. But that it rained so much, they had troubles planting their soybeans, etc. But then when you start talking about climate change and a carbon tax, shut down.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but yeah.
Okay. Even under the Biden administration, that the carbon pricing is quite difficult to introduce. There's little room for carbon pricing.
I think so, yes.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Even if the administration is willing, but it's going to be, it may pass the House of Representatives, but it will would die in the Senate. Note though, I think there are some other legislations that are pushing for some sort of pricing mechanism. There are also voluntary programs at the moment popping up a lot, so that you have firms paying farmers to adopt carbon mitigating practices, and they would then sell those carbon sequestered. they would then sell it to firms that are interested, say if it's an airline or whatever. But it's voluntary, it's not mandatory.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very interesting. In Japan, yeah, actually we have already introduced low rate of carbon tax, not carbon tax, but climate change tax.
Mm-hmm.
In fact,
Yeah, okay.
it is not so famous, but we have already introduced. But the tax on agriculture are exempt.
Yeah.
So maybe I think that the tax for agriculture will be exempt, even though the carbon tax is introduced in the United States.
Yeah.
I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Are there other questions in the audience?
Yeah, I have one last question. What do you think might be the role of hydrogen, like green hydrogen, for the production of fertilizer in this context? Could it?
Yeah. So that's a very good question. I have to admit, I don't know. I have not. I know it's a big topic in. I know it's a big topic in Europe. Hydrogen. I have to admit, I'm sorry, but I don't know. I do not know enough about the possibility for that in the US. To be honest with you, sorry.
Okay, thanks.
I've got another question. You assess the impact on agricultural product exports and imports, I guess, and this may cause carbon leakage or spillovers. And also the impact on land set aside may foster some carbon sequestration. Do you have an idea of about whether these effects are likely to be small or whether they are big?
So we do have. So the paper right here in land use policy, we are actually looking at the effect of carbon leakage, because we are coupling that model also with just changes, not the direct emissions from agriculture, but from land use. So we are basically looking. So we have a carbon tax in the US. It changes land allocation in the US. That then also changes land allocation around the world, and what does it do to leakage? And there we find that there is indeed a little bit of leakage. So you have the carbon tax increase in the US. It is very productive. So agricultural production in the US is very productive, and hence you do get carbon leakage in other countries. I don't have the numbers in my head, but we do see carbon leakage, yes.
Thank you. So congratulations, and it's time for us to move to our second presentation.
Okay.
Unfortunately, our third presenter is sick, so he is not able to present today. So we will just have two presentations. So now I give the floor to Ms. Chenyan Lyu for our second presentation of the session. If you want to.
Okay, I will try to share my screen first.
Yeah. You can also turn on your camera if you want.
Yes, of course. Can you see my full screen now?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so does everything work well now? So I hope you can hear me. And greetings to everyone. Welcome to the presentation here. So first, let me introduce myself. My name is Chenyan Lyu, and I'm a PhD student at the Department of Economics at Copenhagen Business School, also affiliated with Copenhagen School of Energy Infrastructure. So I'm delighted to be here today to present my ongoing paper, Sustainable Energy for Clean Growth in China, Effectiveness and Efficiency of Regional Carbon Markets. In short, this is a market integration paper discussing about comparative exposition of how the dynamics of this regional carbon market in China. It's basically the emission trading scheme in China. How does this market are propagated? And as an overview, I will begin by explaining my motivation and why I'm interested in the China's regional emission trading scheme and what was the research question behind my study. And we'll go through the literature a bit, very classic, and will be the data, methodology, and the empirical results. But some of the results, because I'm still working on some empirical results. So first of all, my motivation came from just to understand the patterns of the dynamic linkages and interdependencies across China's regional carbon markets. I estimate the integration dynamics by using a vector error correction model. But I think understand the market and the economic background behind is really important. So why China? My first reason would be China is responsible for the largest share of the greenhouse emissions, 28% of the world's total. Doesn't change a lot. I think from the recent years, it's from 25% to 28% is growing. But I know that US accounts for 14% and Europe was less than 7% of the global emission. The data was from 2020. So in my opinion, China has the potential to largely reduce the CO2 emissions in the next few decades. And very importantly, last year, China has announced ambitious goals for sustainable energy and carbon neutrality by 2060, and to curb the carbon peak before 2030. Those are from 14th five-year plan from China. That means that China is going to be more stringent in the environment and create more clean technologies and also develop the carbon market. So these 5-year plans in China are not an overly ambitious plan. The measurable targets are conservative and achievable. So even the Chinese leadership did not use this 14th five-year plan to privilege green development, but the plan will push China's green turn forward because it's quite a strong one. And stronger enforcement expected in the next few years. To be more specific into the emission market, in the past, China has mostly relied on the administrative tools to reduce the carbon emissions. So achieving the carbon neutrality through the administrative means, we both know it's costly and inefficient, and we will not reach our goals in carbon neutrality before 2060. And National Development and Reform Commission of China realized this dilemma, and they started to plan for launching the regional ETS in 2013 and decided to use the experiences from 2013 to this year to build the national ETS in 2021. So the national ETS was started trading from this June 2021. Then it was expected to trade 2.5 billion tons of the emission allowances for the first compliance years and only included the power sector. Then China's ETS, including the regional one and the national one, they'll just surpass the EU ETS and become the world's largest carbon market in terms of total traded volumes in tons. And as the plan, initially the regional ETS groups will operate in parallel to the national ETS, but in the longer period, it will be integrated into the national ETS. So that caused a problem here. How to link these regional markets to the national one, because now the regional markets are in a disjoint situation, and this disjoint ETS have caused the market inefficiency and increased the difficulty of linking to the national market, as I just said. So I think it is essential to measure and assess the regional ETS data from the previous pilot phases in order to contribute to the national market design. And it will be very interesting to know which regional ETS pilot in China the design most suits the China's socio-economic needs. But we will go through the market architecture later. I will just introduce some literature review that I did for my paper. And the main complexity of the ETS research lies in the interactions among the 4 agents: government, the enterprises, regulators, and the trading market, to jointly determine the final impact of these market-driven tools. So from the market perspective, the there are many research papers have built a great diversity of models to study the market platform where those participants interact. And there are extensive research have been carried out on the EU ETS, since it is by far the well-known and largest, most liquid and most developed carbon market all over the world. And regarding the techniques as the most preferred quantitative tool, statistical models such as the vector autoregressive model and the vector error correction models are frequently adopted to study EU ETS carbon prices and its influencing factors. For example, there is a paper in the middle, Maza and Petition in 2015, examining the integration on dynamics on the carbon future under the EU ETS. And Mazark also analyzes the carbon factor of carbon spots and the futures in European EU ETS and North American market. So, but since the launch of the Chinese regional market, the researchers shift the interest and they started to show the qualitative and quantitative interest in the China's regional carbon market. In the first 1 to 3 compliance years, I mean, from 2013 to 2060, the paper mostly emphasizes that legal foundation is relatively weak in the regional ETS in China. And a clear legal mandate at the national level is important for developing these regional ETS pilots, and the financial penalties for non-compliant behavior cannot be altered without this changing the laws to a national level. But if you look at the 3rd and 4th paper more recently, they're from a policy perspective. They argue that the monopolies in China's state-owned energy enterprises impede the development of introducing the carbon price and the development of the regional ETS. So the central and the provincial governments have the substantial onus to reform the energy market in order to unbundle the monopolies to further develop the ETS in China, whatever is the regional level or a national level. Sorry. And so now after 7 to 8 compliance years since the 5 main ETS pilot was launched in 2013, there are several reasons have been postulated for growing interest in this regional ETS integration, at least for me. The first one would be the increased flow of the capital across the provincial boundaries due to the relaxation of controls on the non-institutional participants and investors. And also there are some market pilots opened to the foreign investors, for example, the Guangdong ETS. So I will go into some detail of the market architecture here, because this pilot market is very in design. They have different prices, but most of them suffer from several deficiencies, like over allocation of the allowances, which will finally lead to low carbon prices and a low carbon liquidity, weak institutional infrastructure, and inadequate legal basis and regulations. So what I'm interested in, the main research question addressed in my paper is, are these prices of the regional ETS allowances co-integrated with each other? And which market contains the leading information for the rest of the market? Which one is better? And further lies some policy implications for the national, for building the national ETS scheme. So in order to fully understand the price mechanism under this pilot, I think we need to go back to the economic roles and some basic reasons why the government set this kind of pilot in these areas. And these areas actually cover a range of different economic circumstances, and which one most suits the China situation. I will start from Beijing, because this table was about 5 cities and the average price from 2014, which is my sample period 2014 to 2019. So as we both know, Beijing is the center of the country's economy and the capital city. So the Beijing's urban strategic requires improving the environmental quality very fast and from the early stage to phasing out the coal consumption. So the price is the highest, and the overall average price of the emission allowances was 56.8, 20 yuan, Chinese yuan higher than the second highest average price in Shenzhen ETS. And the second one will be Shanghai. It's located in the Yangtze River Delta, and this is the country's most vibrant and commercial and financial hub. So not surprisingly, this city is very keen in developing these carbon-related products, including the repurchases, carbon funds, and carbon forward, and the green bond as well. And in 2020, Shanghai Pilot has opened its carbon auctions to the institutional investors, which is a very good reform. And yeah, very interesting that we can see, and from the south part of China, there are two regional markets, is Guangdong and Shenzhen. And Shenzhen ETS and Guangdong ETS are now both open to the foreign investors now. And see, Shenzhen is a major city in Guangdong province, but the Shenzhen ETS and Guangdong ETS operate in parallel. So we'll start from Guangdong, probably. As you might know, Guangdong's the global trade volume accounts for nearly a quarter of China's total. And if we go back to its active and wide-ranging economy background, the Guangdong ETS has a very high level of freedom and openness. It was the first pilot open to the foreign investors before Shenzhen. And Guangdong ETS has become China's largest carbon trading center with the largest market share. It's highly active, and it has gradually established a multi-level market system in which the primary and secondary market interact with each other. There are so many auctions happened in Guangdong ETS, but not many in the other regional markets. And the special thing of Shenzhen is this municipal has designed dual emission reduction targets, while the others is only the single emission reduction target. The total absolute emission cap can be increased year by year, but the carbon intensity for each participant and the overall average intensity targets need to be decreased over time. And after the analysis, short analysis of these four cities, I could say that Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Guangdong are the four most economically powerful cities or provinces in terms of the GDP growth. And these cities are very actively exploring the carbon market in their own ways. But the last one, the Hubei province in the middle of China, is relatively less developed. The economic growth rate and overall energy infrastructure and the structure are reflective of China as a whole country. And this is, like I can say, it's more representative of a wide range of provinces in China, which are being strongly reliant on the secondary industries and coal consumption, while the inflexible demand of energy consumption continues to develop at the exponential rate. And the carbon pricing exploration in this city, in this province, are relatively stable. And the second graph, nothing changed, just the traded volume here. And as I just said, the darker color means the more active. So I found Guangdong is the most liquid frictional ETS in China. And yes, interestingly, that since the launch of Guangdong ETS in 2013, the transaction volume has increased steadily from 56 million Chinese yuan in 2014, which is the first compliance year, to 843 million Chinese yuan in 90s. And as I just said, Hubei has maintained the most consistent price and volume since its launch in 2014. So I will just briefly discuss the methodology here. So the co-integration among the CO2 products of different regional environmental exchanges describe this, how this market, each of which might be non-stationary, may not be linked in the longer run. So my first step of the empirical analysis is to identify the most appropriate model given the features of the data. So in my model is with constant intercept and 5 transitory dummies. This important fact of the transitory dummies is that they sum to 0 over time, so they don't have any effect on the asymptotic distributions on the trace test. It's a co-integration rank test. And then just the second step is to determination of the number of flags in the multivariate VAR model. And then it's just to test for the co-integration rank of the VAR system to determine whether there are potentially useful co-integrating vectors. And this is typically done by running the trace test by Johansson and Uselius. Finally, there are tests available to test one at a time whether a specific variable does not belong to the co-integrating vector in the long run manner. That's the long run exclusion test with the restrictions on the beta in my study as well. So the data is pretty simple. I collected data myself in the 5 regional carbon markets in China. This is a time series data. I collected daily data and aggregate the average price into a monthly frequency. And because there are so many missing values, but not missing completely at random, but it's just no trading, inactive at an early infancy, these markets. And this plot is not very clear, but in my paper, there is a more clear plot that shows these markets when they are approaching the compliance deadline this period. The secondary market, the trading volume increased with the carbon prices falling to varying degrees. So that means most of the enterprises just want to comply with the rules. It's not that they can make money or very involved in this market. So in order to account for the price fluctuation around this compliance deadline, there are 5 transitory dummies included in my model, but there is an extra one. If you can look at the panel 3, the Guangdong, there is a sharp decrease in 2014 because in September 2014, the Guangdong market adjusts the floor price, also the reserve price for the carbon auction from a minimum of 60 Chinese yuan to 25 in 2014. That's a very big change. And these adjustments mobilize the auction, which results in the secondary market price also falling to the reserve price level of the primary market auction. So in general, we may consider a VAR P model with P legs, where in the left-hand side, the X is a P-dimensional matrix. In my case, it's 5-dimensional. So I also have the error term epsilon T in the right-hand side. And for the likelihood analysis, the estimation of the model typically assume that the epsilon T is conditionally normally distributed within 0 and some covariance matrix omega in the right-hand side as well. This epsilon is assumed to be uncorrelated over time. Then we have the equation 2, 3, 4. I will just briefly say that the vector error correction model gives a reformulation of the equation 1 in terms of the differences, the lag differences, and the level of the process, which naturally classify the relationship into a short run and a long run manner. Yeah, the rank of the matrix pi r, if you can see the first line of the VEC model. This is the error correction term. The rank of the matrix is the error correction term, and it determines the long run relationship. Either the pi equals to 0, or it must have to reduce the rank pi equals to alpha times beta prime, where the alpha denotes the estimation, the speed of the estimation of the adjustment to the equilibrium, and beta denotes the co-integrating relationships vectors. And some of the empirical results that we can clearly see the null hypothesis of R equals to 0 with a trace statistics of 8399, which is significant at 5% level. And that's the first null hypothesis of no co-integration is rejected. But the second one, which is R equals to or smaller than 1, is rejected at 10% level, but not at 5% level. So to conclude at this stage, the trace test indicates that the rank might be 2, but it is just a slight signal. So I just move on with rank 1 for the moment. There might be an indication of more robust integration of this market if the co-integrating rank points firmly at 2 or more co-integrating relationships. And the last result will be the long run long run and short run test result, but I didn't include the long run exclusion test here. From the table 7 from left hand side, I concluded that Beijing ETS and Shenzhen ETS prices show positive relationship to the Guangdong ETS when I normalize Guangdong ETS from the left hand side of the equation, and the Shanghai and Hubei show negative. But after my long run restriction test, Beijing, Shenzhen, and Hubei's allowance price can be omitted in the long run relation in our sample period. So the table on the left hand side, it's not showing the significance level. So now I can conclude it's very clear that each percentage point increase in the Shanghai emission allowances price will cause a decrease of 0.49% in the Guangdong price, which is very significant at 1% level. And from the other short run results, in summary, the Beijing, Hubei, and Guangdong's emission allowances price remain unaffected by any short-term effect from the other regional markets. But the lack emission allowances price in the Beijing and Hubei provinces, the pilots are significant impact on their current emission allowances price. But both Shanghai and Shenzhen seem to be led to changes in lack Beijing emission allowances prices. So as a conclusion, the evidence of the co-integration at rank 1 reveals that these separated regional emission trading schemes are not mutually exclusive of each other. And there is a slight indication that co-integration might be 2, as I just said. So there might be more market integration if we have a stronger data in the recent period. But in conclusion, the generally low level of co-integration in China's ETS pilots within the same sample period may be due to the isolated trading, as well as the different choice of sector coverage and the market threshold in every pilot market. And from the results, we also conclude that Guangdong is the only market in this system in which the error correction term are statistically significant. That suggests that any deviation from the long run equilibrium co-integrating relationship as measured by the error correction term is mainly caused by the changes within the Guangdong ETS pilots. So some takeaway in the opening up of China's traditional economics since 1979, China chose to first establish 4 special economic zones to start a market-oriented reform of the whole economic system by building this price system for the market economy and drive the economic development of the coastal areas, for example, Shanghai and Guangdong and Shenzhen. Since then, China has developed 7 special economic zones and achieved great success until now. So learning from this China's economic reform plan of the 1970s, the transition from regional ETS to a single national integrated ETS fits in with the China's economic and social circumstances. But the diversity of this regional ETS is initially very useful source of learning towards establishing this national ETS. As a national ETS is at the key stage of the construction, they started from this June, as I mentioned earlier. The greater attention should be paid to exploring reasons for difference among the regional pilot carbon markets to improve market mechanisms and provide more market integration. So thank you. Here's just my presentation.
Thanks a lot for the very clear and convincing presentation. Are there questions already in the audience? If so, just turn on your microphone and camera. And if you have to think a bit before talking, I will start. Thanks. I'm happy to learn so much about Chinese regional ETS and to learn that the national one has started this month, because it has been announced many times in the past.
In the past few years, past 10 years actually.
Yeah.
But finally started trading from this month.
Okay, great. Well, the question I have is, to what extent can you interpret your econometric results are causality from one ETS to another, rather than being something else than causality? For example, the business cycle is probably correlated among these cities and regions. So if some regions are in the business cycle is not perfectly correlated, but or just with a lag among these regions, this may have an impact on the demand for allowances and then on the carbon price. And the same may stand for other factors that influencing demand, like other policies, like policies to develop renewables. So yeah, this is basically my question. Not very clear, I'm afraid.
Yeah, okay. So talk about the causalities, we are talking about the price integration. So I know there are some different drivers like the the energy prices, the oil price, gas price might be a driver of the CO2 emissions outside of this market. But now in this stage, I just want to understand and study the relationship between this market solely as market, but that could be included later. And from this model, first of all, the bar model could not work with the non-stationary series. So that's why we moved on to the vector error correction model. Sorry. And yeah, so initially, China now has 8 emission trading schemes, but I only choose 5 because there are some markets only launched for 2 years or 1 year. So I started with these main cities from the beginning until the end, so I can capture the main interactions between this market. Yeah, do you have, does this answer your question, or do you have a follow-up?
Yes. No, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Are there questions in the audience? Go on, don't be shy.
Sorry, I think you muted yourself.
You're right, I was. Thanks, Chenyan. That was a great presentation. Your econometric modeling is quite very impressive, and it makes me wonder if what you've done is a form of calculating cross-price elasticities between the different schemes. Because just from other work, I know that's hard to do, and I haven't seen consensus on how to do. Could we say that what you've done is a way of seeing cross-price elasticities?
Sorry, I don't quite hear very clearly. Can you just repeat the question? Yeah. I'm sorry.
Is your model a way of estimating cross-price elasticities?
So, yes, in the long run, yes, there is. So that's why the long run exclusion tests are there, because I need to make sure if there is rank one co-integrating relationship in my model, and then I have to make sure which one is not included in this system, then that can be excluded. So I can have a precisely elasticity price elasticity between only 2 or 3 variables. But it's very difficult to test which one is significant. But I can say for my test, the Beijing and Shenzhen are totally not in the long run relationship. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Is there another question in the audience? I've got one. The regional ETS differ in many dimensions,
yes.
like the way allowances are allocated, or and many others. Do you see a pattern here between your results and these institutional differences across the ETS?
Yeah, also in my paper, I actually did, when I discussed about the market architecture, there is a very detailed comparison between the institutional features also in the paper. So I didn't actually have limited time here. I didn't explain, but I have to remind myself of all the details. But the different market threshold, different market entry requirements. And for example, in Beijing, it's 1,000 tons 10,000 tons emissions per year for the enterprises to coming into the market. But in Shenzhen, it's only 3,000. And initially in Hubei market, it's 60,000 tons. And they are gradually reduced this to encourage more participants in this market. So there is a detailed comparison, but I have to remind myself. Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions or comments?
I have a more general question. Who's concerned by this ETS market in China?
Sorry?
Who is concerned by the ETS market? Which kind of companies or industries?
So now it's a phase that there are some energy, and especially for the national ETS, it's now the pilot phase only included power generators in China. It's mandatory to involve. And there are some like 100%, 100 to 100 to 300 and to 1,000 level from different regional markets for those energy related companies that are mandatory participate in this compliance requirements. But I would say not the citizen levels. Not many people in China know this market, and some of the institutes, they don't care about this market because it's quite an early stage now. Yeah.
I got a follow-up question. For the other sectors and power generation, which were covered, if I understand well, by some of the regional systems, what happened to them? Are they still in the regional system, or do they join the national one?
So now they will keep this regional market in parallel with the to run with the national one. So the national one now is for the whole power sector in China among different provinces. So there are different market thresholds. Even you located in one of the provincial markets, you are in the regional market, you can still enter the national market. But the market threshold is different. Like if maybe it's 10,000 emissions per year for you to enter the regional market, but for the national market might be 20,000 tons. So you can choose which one you want to participate in, which one you want to trade in. But the incentive for the national market is to encourage the other provinces, they don't have the carbon regional markets, so they can be involved in the national ETS at the moment.
Thank you. Anybody? Question, comment? Yes.
Hi, Junko Ogawa from the Institute of Energy Economics Japan. Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. China is Japan's neighboring countries, and also we have deep relationship in terms of trading, so that we are very keen the Chinese are what kind of percent measure China will introduce. And Mr. O'Brien's question brings me another question, that you said that you calculated price elasticity in your equation, and when we consider or we establish pricing policy, that we have to look at price elasticity. If it is very high, maybe carbon price will okay to be low. But if price elasticity is low, maybe we have to introduce a very high rate of pricing. So I'm very interested in price elasticity. Is this the price elasticity of each region?
Yes, 5 regions here.
Oh, I see.
Also the beta, the coefficient. And not everyone is significant because I can't provide a standard error here because it's kind of biased without the long run exclusion test. But if you look at the third one, it's a true value.
Third one is Shanghai price. They're quite different.
Yeah.
Among the regions.
Yeah, it's normalized to a Guangdong price, and the second one is Beijing, and the third one is Shanghai. In this model, you always need to normalize to one variable.
Right.
It's all endogenous. And I'm happy to answer any question. If you're still interested, you can send me an email. The last slide has my email about the modeling problem.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes, no problem.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks. Another question? Last call? No? Okay. So I'd like to thank our two presenters and the audience for the questions and comments. Hope it has been useful for you. And I wish you a good evening or a good afternoon, depending where you are. And I wish you a happy and fruitful conference. Bye-bye.
Thanks
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.